Chapter 1. The Fall of Troy. Smoke coiled above the walls of Troy, black tendrils drifting into the blood-red dawn. For 10 long years, the Greeks had camped upon the shores beyond the city, their tents spread like a sea of white and bronze. Battle cries had echoed across the plains, and countless heroes had fallen. Now silence reigned, eerie and unnatural. No clamor of shields, no shouts of challenge. The ships were gone, or so it seemed. Only a massive wooden horse stood before the gates, still and strange, its flanks carved with skillful hands. The Trojans gathered, eyes filled with awe and uncertainty. Was it a gift? A tribute to Athena? Or something darker, hidden behind the quiet? Odysseus crouched in the horse's belly, muscles tight, breath shallow. Around him were warriors handpicked for stealth and valor, each one sworn to the plan they'd forged in secrecy. The war had reached a bitter stalemate, both sides weary and grieving. But Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, had proposed a final gambit, one born not of brute force but of guile. Let the Greeks vanish from sight. Let the Trojans believe the war was over. And when their guard was down, let doom emerge from within their very walls. The plan was mad, but it was their only hope to end the endless bloodshed. Meanwhile, the Trojans debated in the shadow of the colossal beast. Laocoon, the priest, cried out in warning. "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtyards. He hurled a spear at the horse, and it struck with a dull, hollow thud. But before doubt could bloom, a terrible thing happened. 2 great sea serpents rose from the waves, writhing and hissing, and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their coils. The people screamed and fled. To them it was a sign. The gods must favor this gift. The priest's death was a warning not against, but for accepting the offering. So with ropes and cheers, they pulled the horse through the gates. That night, the city feasted. Fires danced across Troy's rooftops. Wine flowed, songs rang out, and laughter chased away the ghosts of war. After a decade of siege, it seemed peace had finally come. Priam, the aged king, wept with joy. Cassandra, his cursed daughter, screamed warnings into the night, but no one listened. She had always been touched by the gods, blessed with prophecy, and cursed with disbelief. Her cries went unheard, her visions dismissed. Above the celebration, the horse loomed in the temple square, a silent sentinel. Within it, Odysseus waited. He counted the hours, heart pounding like a war drum. At last, night deepened. The streets fell still, the fires dimmed to embers. From within the horse, a panel creaked open, and Odysseus slipped into the darkness. He motioned silently, and his comrades followed. They dropped to the ground, weapons drawn, shadows among shadows. The gates were unguarded. The sentries slept, drunk on wine and false hope. Odysseus crept to the gatehouse and signaled with a torch. From beyond the walls, ships returned under moonlight. Silent oars sliced the sea. The army poured into the city like a tide of bronze and wrath. There was no mercy. Troy burned, its towers cracked. The gods themselves seemed to weep. Odysseus moved through the chaos, sword flashing, heart hard. This was no triumph. It was ruin. He found Helen among the flames, her beauty untouched by time or sorrow. She wept for the cost of her return. Menelaus, her husband, reclaimed her in silence. Elsewhere, Priam was slain before his altar, his blood soaking the marble of his temple. Aeneas, son of Anchises, gathered the last of Troy's spirit and fled into the night, carrying his father and his future. The city that had defied the world for 10 years crumbled before the dawn. Odysseus watched it fall, and something inside him withered. When the fires died down and the screams faded, the Greeks gathered on the shore. Victory should have tasted sweet, but it was ash. They had won, yes, but at a terrible price. Odysseus stood at the edge of the sea, eyes fixed on the horizon. Home lay far away, across the wine-dark waters. Ithaca, his rocky island, waited. Penelope waited. Telemachus, his son, waited. He longed for them more than for any laurel or glory. He had fought for honor, for country, but in the end it was love that pulled at him. Love and the promise of peace. He stepped aboard his ship, unaware of how long the gods would delay his return. Poseidon watched from the deep, his trident gleaming in the starlight. He bore no love for Odysseus. The fall of Troy had shaken the heavens, and the clever king's defiance would not go unanswered. Already the winds stirred and the sea began to whisper curses. The gods had taken sides in the war, and now they would play their own game with the fates of men. Athena favored Odysseus, true, but her protection would be tested. For the journey ahead would twist through dream and nightmare, through the edge of the world and beyond. And yet Odysseus, strong in will and wit, set forth. The ships left the shore at dawn. Smoke still curled behind them, a mourning shroud for a city turned to ash. The sails caught the wind, and the oars fell into rhythm. Odysseus stood at the prow, hand on his sword, heart full of ghosts. He did not know how many trials lay ahead, nor how many men he would lose before the end. But he knew this much: he would reach Ithaca or die seeking it. No storm, no monster, no wrathful god would break him. The fall of Troy was only the beginning. The world stretched wide before him, full of danger and wonder. As the shores faded behind them, the men sang a low chant, ancient and mournful, honoring those left behind. Achilles, Hector, Patroclus, Paris. So many names carved into memory and myth. Their voices rose and fell with the waves, a dirge and a prayer. Odysseus kept silent. He carried the war in his bones. Every step forward felt like a betrayal to the fallen. But he walked that path anyway. For Penelope, for Ithaca, for the child who barely knew his father. He would wander, suffer, and endure. The gods had begun their games, but Odysseus would play in kind. And so the tale begins, not in peace, but in ruin. Troy lies shattered. The victors sail away, unaware that their trials have only just begun. Odysseus, king of cunning, son of Laertes, hero of the wooden horse, has set his face to the sea. Behind him, the flames of war. Ahead, the wrath of gods and the testing of a man's soul. His Odyssey has begun. The winds rise, and the stars shift in their courses. The story of Troy is over. But the story of Odysseus is just unfolding, with every wave bearing him further from home and deeper into legend. Chapter 2. The Cursed Winds of Ismarus. The sea rolled beneath the ships like a sleeping beast, gentle for now, but never truly still. Odysseus stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sky met the waves in a hazy blur. Troy lay behind them, a memory scorched by fire. The men rowed in silence, their joy shadowed by exhaustion and loss. The gods had given them victory, but peace was still a distant dream. Ahead lay Ismarus, the coastal stronghold of the Ticones, allies of Troy. It was there they made their first landfall, their first mistake, their first curse, upon the long road home. At Ismarus, the warriors leapt ashore with the fury of men still burning with battle. The Cicones were taken by surprise. Their city fell in a single day, the men slaughtered, the women taken, the spoils claimed. Odysseus urged restraint. He knew the laws of the gods. A swift raid, then retreat. But his men, swollen with triumph, drank deep and lingered too long. They feasted and reveled upon the shore, drunk with wine and pride. And as the sun fell, the Cicones rallied. Reinforcements from the hills stormed down like a wave of vengeance, swords gleaming, cries fierce with grief and rage. The beach turned red as battle flared again. This time, it was no easy victory. Odysseus fought like a lion, calling his men to order, but the surprise and the wine had dulled them. Many fell. Too many. 6 from each ship, their names etched into sorrow. Blood soaked the sand where laughter had reigned only hours before. At last, they drove the Cicones back, their ships once more afloat, the dead left behind. As the sails rose and the oars dipped, Odysseus stood at the prow, jaw clenched in bitter silence. The lesson had been harsh. The gods watched. Justice came quickly for the foolish. From Ismarus they sought the open sea, but the winds turned foul. Black clouds gathered. The ships tossed as if toy vessels in a stormy bath. Zeus had seen the insult to the Cicones. Poseidon, already nursing a quiet rage, now stirred the waters with his trident. The sea god's anger was not yet fully kindled, but this was his warning, a taste of the wrath to come. The fleet scattered, struggling to stay together. For 2 days and nights the storm howled. Lightning lanced the waves, and thunder cracked the sky. Men clung to the rails, praying aloud, cursing their folly at Ismarus. When at last the winds broke, the sea lay flat again, deceptively calm. The ships bobbed, battered and weary. Odysseus gathered what strength remained in his men. He spoke not with anger, but with gravity, reminding them that each landfall was a gamble, each moment a test. The gods were listening. Every choice, every indulgence could bring ruin. They had lost comrades already, and many leagues still lay ahead. Some wept, others stared into the water, seeing not waves, but memories. Troy had been a war of swords. The voyage home would be a war of spirit, and they had barely begun to fight. They buried what dead they could in the sand, carving no markers, speaking no names. The sea would remember. Odysseus offered sacrifice to Zeus, pouring wine into the waves, praying for calm. The winds shifted gently, and the fleet set sail once more. But the taste of death clung to them. The men rowed slower now, their faces drawn. Each one had seen how quickly triumph could turn to tragedy. Odysseus, ever watchful, kept his thoughts hidden. But deep within, he wondered whether this journey would demand more than any battle ever had. The gods were not done with them. Not even close. As the coastline faded, the whispers of Ismarus lingered on the wind. Voices of the slain, of the grieving, of the gods themselves. Odysseus knew those voices would follow him, like shadows on the sail. He could not change what had been done. All he could do was steer his men through the trials ahead, with sharper caution and deeper reverence. The world beyond Troy was wide and strange, filled with wonders and terrors. The cursed winds had spoken, and in their howl a warning. The path home was not straight, and no hero would leave it unchanged. Chapter 3. Among the Lotus-Eaters. The sun cast a gentle gold across the sea as the ships drifted toward a low-lying shore veiled in mist. The wind had stilled, as though the gods themselves were holding their breath. Odysseus, eyes narrowed, scanned the coastline. No smoke rose, no guards stood watch. The island lay quiet, wrapped in a heavy silence. His men, worn thin by the storm and the loss at Ismarus, looked on it with longing. They needed rest. So he gave the order. The ships beached softly on sand as white as bone. The men stepped ashore, stretched their limbs, and walked into the strange hush of this unfamiliar land. They found no city, no temple, no cries of welcome or warning. Instead, there were fields of pale flowers swaying in the breeze, delicate and sweet-scented. The air itself felt thick, almost sleepy. From the hills, a few gentle people appeared, smiling with eyes like pools of calm water. They spoke little and offered food, fruits soft as silk, dripping with nectar. The men, curious and hungry, ate. And as they did, something shifted. Their weariness vanished, but so too did their memory. Their will to leave, their hunger for home, melted into dream. They had eaten the lotus. They had forgotten everything. Odysseus waited, watching the shore, puzzled by the delay. He sent more men to seek the others, and when they returned, their faces were pale. "They will not leave," they said. "They do not remember you. They speak only of staying." Odysseus rose at once, storm in his eyes. He took a rope and his sword and strode into the lotus fields. The air thickened around him. The scent of the flowers clawed at his thoughts. But he pressed on, finding his men lying in the sun, smiling like children. They looked up at him with no recognition. "Why leave?" one whispered. "There is peace here." With fury and sorrow, Odysseus seized them. He tied their hands and dragged them, weeping and dazed, back to the ships. They cried out for the fields, for the fruit, for the calm, but he did not yield. He knew what was at stake. If one memory faded, the rest could follow. He forced them aboard, their cries haunting his ears, and gave orders to launch. The others, watching with wide eyes, understood then that this place was no sanctuary. It was a trap in velvet. As the oars cut the water once more, the land of the Lotus-Eaters slipped behind them, silent and unchanged. No enemy had raised a sword, no monster had roared, yet the danger had been deadly. Oblivion disguised as comfort. Odysseus stood at the prow, grim and unshaken. He spoke to his crew not as a commander, but as a brother. "You must remember," he said. "Remember Ithaca, remember your families, your homes, your names. That memory is your shield. Without it, you are lost." The men nodded, subdued. Some cried softly, shamed by their weakness. But Odysseus forgave them. The island had not stolen their strength. It had stolen their purpose. And without purpose, even the strongest man becomes a ghost in his own life. Night fell, and the stars returned to their silent watch above the sea. The crew huddled in silence, haunted not by battle but by forgetting. They whispered stories of their homes, clutching memories like lifelines. One spoke of olive trees and the smell of bread. Another recalled his daughter's laugh. They shared their memories like treasure, each one a spark to push back the darkness. Odysseus listened, heart swelling with quiet pride. He too whispered Penelope's name to the waves, and saw in the distance not the void of sea, but the distant dream of Ithaca, his anchor, his hope. And so they sailed on, the winds rising again behind them, pushing them toward the next trial. The sea held many temptations, but now they knew. Sometimes the softest places hide the deepest dangers. Sometimes a flower is a chain. The island faded behind them, but its lesson would not. The gods tested not just the body, but the mind and heart. The journey home would demand all three, and Odysseus, son of Laertes, would give nothing less. Chapter 4. The Cave of the Cyclops. The sea turned dark beneath the hulls as the ships cut across deeper waters. The men spoke less now, their laughter swallowed by the memory of the lotus fields. Odysseus, ever watchful, scanned the horizon. To the west, a jagged island rose from the sea like the broken back of a sleeping beast. Wild and steep, it bore no sign of cities, no smoke, no sails, yet it called to him, mysterious and untouched. He ordered one ship toward it while the others waited offshore. Perhaps food could be found. Perhaps knowledge. But behind his hunger stirred curiosity, that double-edged trait of all great men. They landed near a cave mouth, its size like a wound in the face of the cliff. Around it grazed flocks of sheep and goats, large and unguarded. No fences, no dogs, no herdsmen in sight. Odysseus selected 12 of his best men and led them forward, weapons at their sides, skins of sweet wine slung on their backs. It was a gift from the priest of Apollo, spared at Ismarus. Odysseus carried it now like a seed of hope or a bribe. The cave was dim, the walls rough and damp. Baskets of cheese and piles of logs filled the air with the scent of animals and ash. The men urged him to take the food and flee, but Odysseus refused. "We must wait for the master of this place," he said. "We will offer gifts and ask hospitality, as the laws of Zeus command." So they sat and waited, eating a little, but keeping watch. As dusk fell, a shadow crossed the mouth of the cave. A giant entered, tall as a tree and broad as a boulder. One eye glared from his forehead. He carried a great bundle of wood and drove the flocks inside behind him. Then he rolled a massive stone across the entrance, too large for any dozen men to move. The Cyclops was home. He lit a fire and his eye swept across them. "Strangers," he growled. "Who are you to come unbidden into my cave?" Odysseus rose, heart pounding but voice steady. "We are Greeks, blown off course from Troy. We seek shelter and offer wine in the name of Zeus, protector of guests." The Cyclops bared his teeth in a terrible grin. "We Cyclopes care nothing for your gods. Might makes right here." And without warning, he seized 2 of the men, dashed their heads against the rock, and ate them raw. Bones cracked beneath his teeth. Blood slicked the floor. The Greeks cried out in horror. That night, they huddled in fear, trapped behind the stone. Odysseus whispered plans, his mind working like a bow drawn tight. Escape was impossible by strength. But he had wit. At dawn, the Cyclops ate 2 more, then left with his flocks. As the sun climbed, Odysseus found a great olive trunk, green and thick. With his men, he sharpened it to a point, hardened it in the fire, and hid it among the dung. When evening fell, the Cyclops returned. He devoured 2 more men. Odysseus stepped forward, offered the wineskin. "Drink, mighty one," he said. "A gift for your hospitality." The Cyclops drank deep, then deeper. His eyelid drooped. He belched and grinned. "What is your name, stranger?" he slurred. "My name is Nobody," said Odysseus. "Well then, Nobody. I will eat you last." The Cyclops laughed himself into a stupor and collapsed. Odysseus gave the signal. They seized the great stake, heated it red hot in the embers, and drove it into the giant's eye. He roared in agony, thrashing and howling, tearing the air with screams. He called to the other Cyclopes on the island, but when they asked who harmed him, he bellowed, "Nobody!" So they left him alone, thinking him mad. Blinded, the Cyclops groped in the dark. He rolled the stone away, hoping to catch them as they fled. But Odysseus had another plan. At dawn, he lashed his men beneath the bellies of the rams. When the flock left, the blind giant felt their backs, never guessing the men clung beneath. They slipped past, silent as mist. Only Odysseus remained behind. He waited until the last, then clung to the largest ram. As the cave emptied, he let go and joined his men. They ran for the ship, hearts racing, and leapt aboard. The sails rose. The oars churned. They were free. But pride, that faithful curse of heroes, stirred in Odysseus. As the ship pulled away, he shouted to the shore, "Cyclops, you monster! If any ask who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." A terrible silence followed. Then the Cyclops lifted his hands to the sky and called upon Poseidon, his father. "Hear me, Earthshaker! Curse him who blinded me! Let him wander long, lose all companions, and return to a house of trouble." The waves trembled. The winds shifted. Poseidon heard. And in that moment, Odysseus sealed his fate. The men rowed on, the island shrinking behind them. They had escaped, but the price was set. The wrath of a god now followed them, patient and cruel. Odysseus said nothing, though his jaw was tight and his eyes hollow. His cleverness had saved them. His pride had doomed them. The men spoke little, mourning the 6 they had left behind. The sea rolled beneath them, deep and indifferent. Ahead lay more islands, more gods, more choices. But behind them, in a cave of stone and blood, a blind Cyclops raged and remembered. And so the Odyssey continued, not just across the waters, but into the very heart of fate. Chapter 5. The Gift of Aeolus. The wind pushed their sails as if the gods had taken pity on their weary bones. After the horror of the Cyclops, the men rowed with silent purpose, the memory of blood and bone never far behind. Days passed. Then the sea grew gentle again. The sky widened, cloudless and deep. Odysseus stood at the helm, face tilted to the breeze. It was the scent of calm, of land approaching. And soon they saw it, a floating island ringed by bronze walls that shimmered in the sun, a fortress upon the sea. Aeolia, the realm of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Their ship docked at the smooth shore, and messengers led them through golden gates into the palace of the Wind King. Aeolus was no god, but he was close. Appointed by Zeus himself, he held dominion over the tempests and breezes that ruled the earth's air. He welcomed Odysseus and his men with warmth, eager for tales of Troy and the world beyond his floating isle. For a month they remained, feasting, resting, telling stories of war and wanderings. Aeolus listened with keen eyes, and in time he came to admire the wit and tenacity of the man from Ithaca. When the time came to depart, Odysseus spoke plainly. "Great Aeolus, grant me favor," he said. "Give me safe passage to my home across the waves." Aeolus, moved by respect and friendship, summoned a great oxhide bag. In it, he sealed every wind but one, the gentle west wind, to guide them safely to Ithaca. "Guard this well," he warned, handing the tied sack to Odysseus. "No hand but yours must open it. Within lies the storm." Odysseus thanked him, his heart alight with hope. For the first time since Troy fell, he believed home lay within reach. Ithaca was not a dream, it was near. They set sail, the bag lashed tight to the mast, the breeze soft but steady. For 9 days they rode the sea, never veering, never delayed. The coastline of Ithaca, his beloved land, finally emerged, misty but real, like a vision drawn from prayer. Odysseus stood at the prow, arms wide, eyes stinging with joy. He saw the peaks he knew, the harbors, the olive groves dancing on the wind. But he did not sleep. For 9 nights he had stood watch, and now, with Ithaca in sight, exhaustion claimed him. He lay down beside the mast, the bag of winds beside him, and closed his eyes. The men watched their captain sleep, his face softened by dreams, and their thoughts turned. What lay in that bag, so carefully guarded? What treasure had Aeolus given that Odysseus would not share? Gold? Jewels? Riches to rival Troy? Greed stirred like an old fire. They whispered among themselves, hands twitching. "We have bled and starved with him," one murmured. "Should we not share in his reward?" Another nodded. "Let us see what our king keeps from us." So while Odysseus slept, they crept to the bag, loosed its strings, and pulled the mouth wide. The wind screamed free. In an instant the sky blackened. The sea roared. A hurricane burst from the sack, sending the ship spinning, oars snapping, sails tearing. The men howled as they were flung back across the waves, away from Ithaca, away from home. Odysseus woke to the sound of chaos, his heart plunging like a stone. He saw the island vanish behind them, swallowed by clouds. Rage and sorrow twisted within him. "Fools," he cried, "you have undone us all." But the wind cared nothing for curses. It hurled them back toward Aeolia, to the very place where hope had last stood bright. Once more, they climbed the golden hill, humbled and broken. Odysseus knelt before Aeolus, sack in hand, shame in his eyes. "We were undone by folly, not fate," he confessed. "Give me another chance." But Aeolus stepped back, his face like carved stone. "The gods curse your journey, Odysseus. I will not defy them again. Go, your fate is no longer mine to shape." And with that, he turned away. No banquet, no firelight, no song welcomed them this time. The doors of the palace closed, and the sea waited, wide and cold. They launched once more, this time without guidance. The skies hung heavy, and the winds blew with spite. Days passed in grim silence. Food grew scarce. The men no longer sang or dreamed aloud. Even Odysseus grew quiet, burdened by the weight of their failure. Hope had been within arm's reach. Now it lay behind them, scattered on the wind. Still, he would not yield. He studied the stars, watched the currents, whispered prayers to Athena in the dark. And when the winds softened, they sailed again, toward lands unknown, toward whatever trial came next. For there was no other choice. The sea is not cruel, it is indifferent, and the gods are not evil. They are eternal, and their will is their own. Odysseus knew this. He bore it like a scar beneath his skin. Yet still he fought, not with sword, but with will. The bag of winds was gone. Trust had been shattered. But the journey must continue. Each island, each storm, each sorrow would shape him further, peel away what was weak, and forge what must endure. Home was not only a place, it was a promise. A promise he would not break, no matter how long the gods sought to delay him. The men rode on beneath a gray sky. Their silence now was not only grief, but understanding. They had opened the bag, and they had opened the path to suffering. But Odysseus did not punish them. He let their guilt weigh its own measure. The sea was punishment enough, and in time they would need each other more than ever. For they had not yet reached the edge of their trials. They had only begun. In the nights that followed, they spoke again of Ithaca, its hills, its hearths, its olive trees bending with fruit. They dreamed aloud, not of gold, but of bread, of laughter, of wives and children grown taller in their absence. And Odysseus, hearing their voices, believed that perhaps, even in failure, there could be something salvaged. Not treasure, not glory, but brotherhood. And in that, there was still strength. The sea whispered no answer. Only the creak of the hull and the slap of wave against wood replied. But deep in the heart of their journey, a new wind stirred. One not of Aeolus's making, but their own. The wind of endurance. The wind that would carry them onward, if not to Ithaca, then to whatever fate the gods had drawn for them. Chapter 6. The Land of the Laestrygonians. For days the sea stretched quiet before them, a slate of blue beneath a pale sky. The ships moved steadily, the men working in silence, haunted by the memory of the bag of winds. Food grew scarce again. Water ran low. Salt clung to their skin and burned their eyes. Then, far ahead, jagged cliffs rose like the teeth of some ancient god. Beyond them, a harbor, narrow and deep, with walls of rock so high they swallowed the light. Odysseus stood at the helm, uneasy. Something in the stillness of that inlet made his flesh tighten, but his men, worn and hungry, saw only shelter. One by one the ships entered the harbor. It was like slipping into the throat of a beast. The cliffs closed in above, and the sea calmed so completely it felt unnatural. There was no wind, no birds, no sound. Only Odysseus kept his ship outside the inlet, moored just beyond the mouth, tied by a long rope to the rocks. His instincts, sharpened by trial, told him to wait. He sent a small scouting party inland to search for food and signs of life. Among them was a herald and a pair of warriors. They climbed the cliffs and crossed into the strange land beyond. At first, they found no one, only fields of grain and great herds of sheep. The land seemed rich and wide. Then they came upon a girl, tall and strong, drawing water at a spring. She greeted them kindly and led them to her home, a towering stone house near the heart of the city. But when they entered, the truth revealed itself. Her father was not a man, but a giant, a true monster, the king of the Laestrygonians. Enormous and cruel, he seized one of the scouts and smashed him against the floor like an insect. The others fled, but the alarm had been raised. The Laestrygonians were no ordinary people. They were cannibals, towering beasts in human form with strength that shattered stone and hunger that never slept. They poured from the city, armed with spears as tall as trees, and stormed down the cliffs toward the harbor. Before the Greeks could react, the slaughter began. One by one, the ships trapped in the narrow harbor were crushed. The giants hurled boulders from above, splintering hulls, killing men before they could draw swords. Those who leapt into the water were speared like fish. The harbor became a bowl of blood. Only Odysseus, whose ship had remained outside the inlet, saw the ambush in time. He cut the rope with a sword, shouting to his crew, "Row! Row for your lives!" The oars struck water as the Laestrygonians turned toward them, roaring with fury. But the narrow entrance slowed the giants, and Odysseus's ship, light and swift, slipped through before they could reach it. The cliffs echoed with screams, and then silence. All the other ships were gone. Every man aboard them, gone. The sea closed over them, still and pitiless. Odysseus's ship drifted into the open water, the sun returning like a cruel jest. Only one ship remained now, his. Of the fleet that had left Troy in fire and glory, only a single vessel creaked beneath the weight of the living. The survivors sat in stunned silence, their faces hollow. Some wept. Others stared into the sky. Odysseus stood at the helm, his face stone. He did not speak of vengeance. There was no vengeance to take, only memory and the vow to survive. They sailed away from that cursed land, the cliffs vanishing behind a curtain of mist. The sea offered no comfort. It simply rolled beneath them, wide and endless. That night, as the men huddled beneath the stars, Odysseus sat alone. He spoke not to his men, but to the gods. "What do you seek from me?" he whispered. "Is it pride you punish, or do you test what no man can endure?" The stars gave no answer, and the wind carried no reply. But deep in his heart, Odysseus knew this journey was not meant to be survived by all, only those who could bear the weight of loss. The next day, they did not speak of the Laestrygonians. They did not carve names into wood or offer sacrifices. There was no time, no strength. Grief had become a shadow they carried like a second skin. Yet Odysseus did not let it break him. He stood tall before his men and reminded them of Ithaca. "Our home still waits," he said. "If the gods test us, let us prove we are worthy." And though their hearts were sore, the men nodded. They would follow him still. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because he was the only man left who had not yet yielded. As the days passed and the land fell away behind them, they met calm seas once more. But calm now brought no comfort. Each man watched the horizon with wary eyes, wondering what land they would reach next, what god or beast would await them there. The world had become a place of hidden teeth, of beauty wrapped in death. Odysseus understood this now. He no longer sought kindness from the sea, only a path through it, a path that would lead eventually to Ithaca or to the grave. But though the trials grew heavier, his spirit did not falter. It changed, yes, grew sharper, darker, tempered by fire and sorrow. But it did not break. That was his strength. Others had stronger arms, braver hearts, louder names. But Odysseus endured, and in that he was unmatched. He did not ask the gods for ease, only for the chance to face whatever came. And so, though the sea rose and the stars wheeled above him in silence, he sailed on, and the Odyssey continued. Chapter 7. Enchanted by Circe. The sea sighed beneath the ship as it glided westward, the last light of day caught on the crests of the waves. The cliffs of the Laestrygonians had vanished into memory, but the weight of loss still pressed on the crew like lead. Only one ship remained, a single thread in the vastness of the sea. Odysseus stood at the helm, his jaw set, his eyes forward. Each man aboard that vessel carried the ghost of a friend left behind, yet the gods had not ended them. Not yet. And so they sailed on, toward the unknown, toward the Isle of Aeolus. The island rose like a green jewel from the sea, cloaked in dense forests that breathed mist and fragrance. Odysseus, cautious from too many trials, beached the ship at a safe distance and climbed a rocky bluff to survey the land. No sign of beast or man could be seen, only the sound of bird song and the wind stirring the trees. That night they camped beside a stream, drinking sweet water and resting their broken spirits. In the morning, Odysseus divided his men into two groups. One would stay behind and guard the ship. The other, led by Aeolus, would explore the island. Aeolus led his team through the woods, following a trail of fragrant smoke. Soon they came upon a clearing where a great stone house stood among meadows of herbs and flowers. Around the house moved wild animals, lions, wolves, leopards, but strangely, they made no attack. They only watched with wide, knowing eyes. From within came the sound of a woman's voice, singing a song that made the air itself feel drowsy. Then she appeared, tall, golden-haired, with eyes like dusk and lips that smiled with both warmth and mischief. This was Circe, daughter of the sun god Helios, mistress of enchantments. She welcomed the strangers into her hall and offered them food and wine. Tired, hungry, and soothed by her presence, they accepted. But the wine was laced with dark magic. No sooner had they eaten than Circe waved her wand and spoke a spell. The men cried out, but their cries twisted into squeals. Their arms shrank, their skin bristled with hair. One by one, they became swine, snorting and stumbling across the floor. Circe laughed lightly and herded them into pens outside, where she fed them acorns and husks, as if they had always been beasts. Only Aeolus had not entered. He fled back through the forest, heart pounding, and threw himself at Odysseus's feet. "They are gone," he gasped. The goddess turned them into animals. Odysseus's face grew dark, but he did not hesitate. He strapped on his sword, slung his bow, and made for the house alone. On the way, a figure appeared, tall, bright-eyed, in the form of a youth. It was Hermes, messenger of the gods. "Odysseus," he said, "you go to face Circe, who bends men to her will. Take this." And he handed him a sprig of moly, a sacred herb with white flowers and black root. "It will shield you from her spell. Use your wit. Make her swear an oath." Odysseus thanked him and went on. When he reached the house, Circe welcomed him as she had the others. He entered, but when she offered him wine, he drank it and stood unmoved. When she raised her wand to strike, he drew his sword and rushed her. "Swear by the gods you will do no harm," he said. She, startled, and now frightened, swore the oath. Her power had failed, her spell had broken, and something in her shifted. She lowered her wand, eyes full of wonder, and said, "You are no ordinary man." Odysseus, breathing hard, lowered his sword. From that moment, Circe's cruelty vanished. She became a host, a lover, a comforter. She restored his men to their human forms, shaken, confused, but unharmed. She bathed them, clothed them, and fed them. Odysseus returned to his ship and led them all to the great hall, where they were received not as intruders, but as guests. The men, stunned by her change, dared not question the miracle. They stayed, resting, healing, slowly allowing themselves to believe they were safe. Days passed. Then weeks. Circe's island, rich and still, became a kind of haven. Time seemed to slow beneath its enchanted skies. But Odysseus, though drawn to Circe's beauty and her strange gentleness, never forgot his purpose. One evening, as they sat together, he said softly, "I must leave. I have a home to return to, a wife, a son I've not seen in 10 years. Circe's eyes darkened, but she did not rage. Instead, she nodded and said, "Then you must go not forward, but downward." He stared at her, uncomprehending. "To reach Ithaca, you must first speak to the dead," she said. "You must sail to the land of the Cimmerians and seek the ghost of Tiresias, the blind prophet. Only he can guide you home." The words chilled him. To speak with the dead? To journey into the land of shadow? He did not show fear, but he felt it. Still, he bowed his head. "Tell me what I must do." Circe gave him detailed instructions. How to sail to the edge of the world, how to dig the trench, how to offer the black blood of sacrifice to summon the shades. She warned him of what he might see, and whom. Do not be lured by the spirits. They hunger for life. Stay strong. Ask only your questions and leave. Then she embraced him one final time, her arms warm with a sorrow. She did not speak aloud. When morning came, the men readied the ship. Their hearts were heavy. For a moment, they had almost believed their trials were over, but now they faced a voyage darker than any before. The sea would take them not toward home, but toward death. Yet Odysseus stood firm. He had survived giants, enchantments, storms, and his own pride. Now he would cross into the very realm of Hades, if that's what it took to find the path back to Ithaca. He placed his hand on the mast, stared into the rising sun, and gave the order to sail. Circe stood upon the high cliffs of Aea, her golden hair swirling in the sea wind like firelight caught in motion, her long robes billowing around her like waves frozen in time. She watched in silence as the ship pulled away, its sails shrinking against the horizon, her eyes locked upon the fading silhouette of Odysseus. She did not move, did not call out. Whether she wept, no man could say, for her face was as still as marble, carved with something deeper than grief, something ancient and private. The sea crashed below, but she stood unmoved, a figure of magic and memory. Behind her, the island shimmered in the morning mist, as if it too were withdrawing into legend. The enchanted groves grew still. The beasts she had tamed paced quietly in the trees, and the halls of her house echoed with emptiness. No music played now. No spells were sung. Only the wind whispered through the columns, carrying away the last breath of her touch. Aeolus returned to silence, cloaked in green and gold, unchanged and eternal. And before the departing ship, nothing but the open sea, a wide, uncertain darkness stretching endlessly toward the edge of the world. Chapter 8. Journey to the Underworld. The sea turned colder as they sailed into the west. The winds carried no birdsong, only the endless sigh of waves and the cry of distant things that never showed themselves. The sun no longer rose in full. It hovered like a dying ember behind a veil of clouds. The men grew quiet, watching the sky with hollow eyes. They knew their course now led them not toward any land of men, but toward the edge of the world, toward the dark mouth of Hades. Only Odysseus stood resolute, steering them onward. What lay ahead was shadow, but in that shadow was the key to home. They sailed for many days, past strange lands and waters where no god walked and no wind stirred unless it meant harm. Circe's instructions echoed in Odysseus's mind. At last the ship reached the bleak shore of the Sirens, where the sky wept mist and the sun never showed. Here, beyond all light, was the threshold of the dead. The men disembarked, their steps slow, as though the very air pressed them down. Odysseus ordered them to dig a trench as wide as a man's arm and as deep as a man's knee. Around it, they laid offerings, honey, wine, milk, barley, and then the blood of a black ram and ewe. The ground drank the blood, and then the dead came. They rose from the dark, whispering and moaning, their forms half seen in the fog, shadows of what they had been. Odysseus held them back with his sword, guarding the trench. The ghosts cried out, aching for the taste of life, but he waited for one above all. Tiresias, the blind prophet. At last, the shade of the seer rose from the earth, tall and still, eyes blank but seeing. He drank of the blood and spoke. "Odysseus," he said, "you seek your home, but many trials remain. Poseidon will hound you. Your men will face temptation and ruin. You will reach Ithaca, but only if you restrain your hunger and your pride." Tiresias warned him of the sun god's cattle, holy beasts grazing on the island of Thrinacia. "Harm them not," he said, "or your men will die and you will return alone, in grief and pain." Then the prophet faded, his voice drifting like wind through bone. But more ghosts pressed in. Odysseus saw his mother, Anticlea, pale and trembling. He had not known she had died. His heart tore. She drank from the trench and recognized him, tears glistening in her eyes. She told him of Ithaca, how Penelope endured in sorrow, how Telemachus grew tall in his absence. Odysseus wept then, as a son, not a warrior. One by one, the spirits came, warriors who had died at Troy. Agamemnon, bitter and grim, told him of betrayal and murder. "Trust not your wife's joy," he warned, "nor her silence. Come in secret, or lose all." Then Achilles, proud and mighty, spoke, "I would rather be a servant among the living than a king among the dead." Even in death he mourned life. And Ajax, whom Odysseus had bested in battle for Achilles' armor, stood apart, silent and cold, unwilling to speak. His pride, even in death, was unbroken. Odysseus felt the weight of all he had gained, and all he had lost. There were more, too many to name, shades of lovers, enemies, nameless soldiers, and forgotten kings. The dead drifted like leaves in a winter wind, whispering secrets and sorrows. Some cried for justice. Others wept for the world they could no longer touch. Odysseus held firm, but inside him something bent. The journey had already tested his strength. Now it tested his soul. At last he turned from the trench and poured libations to close the rite. He sheathed his sword. The ghosts faded, drawn back to their silence. The wind rose again. It was time to return to the world of the living. He rejoined his men, who waited pale and trembling. None asked what he had seen. They pushed the ship back to sea in silence. The sails caught a soft wind, Circe's last favor, and they turned eastward once more. Behind them, the dark shore receded, swallowed by mist. Odysseus stood at the prow, changed. Not older, but quieter. The dead had spoken, and what they told could not be forgotten. The future was no longer unwritten. It was a path of pain and sacrifice. Yet the way home was clearer now, and with it came resolve. No matter what came, he would see Ithaca again. The sea calmed as they left the land of the dead. The men dared to breathe again. Some spoke prayers. Others simply closed their eyes and dreamed of sunlight. But Odysseus remained watchful. He remembered Tiresias's warnings. The island of Helios. The cattle of the sun. The danger of pride and the hunger of men. He would have to lead them not only through storm and sea, but through their own desires. He would have to be more than a hero. He would have to be a guide. A father to the lost. A shield against ruin. Night fell. The stars returned above them, silent witnesses to all that had passed. Odysseus raised his eyes and whispered to Athena, his unseen protector, "I have spoken with the dead. I have seen what waits for me. Walk with me now, goddess. Help me bring them home." The sails flapped gently. The sea whispered. And for the first time in many days, the wind smelled faintly of salt and pine, the smell of land, of promise. The journey was not over. The worst was yet to come, but they had passed through the shadow. They had returned. The Odyssey continued. Chapter 9, The Song of the Sirens. The sea stretched wide and blue as the ship moved steadily eastward, carrying the weight of silence and memory. The dark host of the dead had faded into the past, but its shadow still clung to the men. They said little. Even laughter seemed foreign now. Odysseus stood at the helm, steady as stone, his mind fixed on what lay ahead. He remembered Tiresias's warning. More trials waited. Temptations not of violence, but of longing. And soon, the wind brought a scent not of salt, but of sweetness. Flowers and honey, and something else. Music, soft and low, drifting over the waves like a forgotten dream. Odysseus knew what it meant. The island of the Sirens lay ahead. There, the sea narrowed and curved, forcing all ships close to their cursed shore. The Sirens waited, hidden, their bodies unknown, their faces unseen, but their voices, gods and men alike could not resist. They sang not with beauty alone, but with truth. Each song was different, shaped to the heart of the listener. Heroes heard their names in poems of praise. Lovers heard promises of return. Scholars heard wisdom no mortal had known. And every man who listened gave up his oar, his will, and his life, drifting toward the rocks with smiles on their lips. Odysseus called his men together. "We are near," he said. "The Sirens sing not with words, but with the soul. If you hear them, you will not choose to die. You will simply stop choosing. So you must not hear them at all." He brought forth a block of beeswax, soft and pale. "Plug your ears with this. Mold it tight. Do not remove it until we are safely past." The men obeyed, kneading wax into their ears until they could hear nothing but their breath. But Odysseus had another plan. "Bind me to the mast," he said, "hand and foot. No matter what I say, do not release me." They tied him tightly with ropes, lashed to the mast until he could not move. Then the ship entered the pass, the cliffs drawing close, the water turning strange and green. The sky darkened slightly, though no clouds moved. And then they came, the voices. At first it was only a murmur, but it rose swiftly, wrapping the ship like silk. Odysseus heard his name spoken in perfect melody. "Odysseus! Odysseus!" It was not loud, but it pierced him like a spear. "Come to us," they sang. "Great king of Ithaca, son of Laertes, breaker of Troy. Hear us, learn all that was and will be. We know the path you seek, we see your pain. Rest, and all will be revealed. You will return home not in sorrow, but in triumph." His heart thundered. The ropes bit into his skin. He screamed to his men, commanding them to turn the ship, to loose him. But they could not hear. Their eyes were forward, their hands steady on the oars. Odysseus raged, struggling against the bonds, begging and cursing by turns. The Siren's song changed, matching every shift in his soul. "Your wife waits in darkness. Your son grows old without you. Would you not see them now, here, across the water? Would you not know the truth of your fate?" Their voices shimmered with sorrow, with joy, with ancient knowledge. He wept, though he did not know why. Still the ship moved on. The men rowed steadily, deaf to the seduction around them. The Sirens' island came into view. Low cliffs, black rocks, bones strewn along the shore like driftwood. But no figure stood upon it. Only the song lingered, invisible and endless. Odysseus thrashed and howled. Part of him knew the danger. Part of him wanted to leap into the sea and swim to the music. But the ropes held. The mast held. And the ship passed through. Slowly, the song faded. The air lightened. The sky opened. The men saw Odysseus sagging against the mast, wild-eyed and trembling. At his signal, they removed the wax from their ears. Then they untied him, and he collapsed to his knees. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he looked at them and said, "We must keep going. Quickly, the next danger waits. They sailed on, but none who had seen his face as he listened to the Sirens ever forgot it. It was the face of a man who had stood at the edge of knowing everything and turned away. Odysseus never spoke of what he had heard, but he carried it like a scar. Some knowledge is too costly. Some truths are better left beyond the reach of men. As the island of the Sirens vanished into the horizon, Odysseus gripped the rail and stared ahead. The next trial would come quickly. The sea narrowed once more, and in its strait waited two horrors of the deep, Scylla and Charybdis. But that tale, too, must be told. Chapter 10. Between Scylla and Charybdis. The sea narrowed into a corridor of shadow and foam, the waves surging harder with each mile. The cliffs ahead rose like jaws on either side, their black faces jagged and wet with spray. This was the place Circe had warned of. Odysseus knew it the moment he saw it, and dread settled in his gut. Here, the sea offered two paths, and neither brought safety. On the left lurked Charybdis, the great whirlpool, whose hunger could swallow ships whole. On the right, Scylla, the six-headed monster, perched high in her cave, waiting to snatch sailors from their decks. No man could pass unscathed. The men gazed in silence at the strait, waiting for guidance. Odysseus called them close. "We face two evils," he said, "but only one leaves us a chance." He told them nothing of Scylla's nature, only that they must keep to the cliff on the right, rowing swiftly and without delay. Do not break ranks. Do not slow. Do not stare into the dark. Row with all your strength, and we may survive. Then, quietly, he armed himself. He gripped his spear and fastened his armor, though Circe had warned that no weapon could defeat the monster above. Still, he would not pass without defiance. The ship crept forward, sails furled, driven only by the oars. The roar of Charybdis rose like thunder, a churning gurgle that turned the sea itself into a funnel of death. Odysseus looked left and saw it, water circling madly, the ocean falling in on itself, vanishing into a pit, only to erupt again in an explosion of spray and wreckage. No ship could survive its grasp. He turned away quickly, focusing on the rock face ahead. Scylla's cave yawned high above them, invisible in the mist. But she was there, waiting. The men rowed hard, their eyes forward, muscles burning. Then came the moment. A sudden shriek, shrill and unnatural, split the air. From above, Scylla struck. 6 heads, each with fangs long as a sword, darted down in a blur of motion. 6 men screamed. 6 were lifted from the deck, flailing in the air. Odysseus turned in time to see them, arms reaching, mouths open in silent terror, as they were swallowed by the beast above. Blood rained on the deck. The ship rocked violently. Then, just as quickly, it was over. The heads withdrew into the cave. The sea closed behind them. The crew rowed on, pale and shaking, some weeping openly. Odysseus said nothing. He had known this was coming. He had chosen the lesser evil. Had they passed closer to Charybdis, all would have perished. Instead, 6 had been taken. It was a wound he would carry forever. Their names etched themselves into his mind. Fathers, sons, comrades. The sea had claimed them, and the gods had made no protest. When they reached calmer waters, the oars fell still. The men lay slumped, their eyes empty. Odysseus stood at the prow, the salt wind biting his face. He did not weep. Not here. Not yet. Leadership was not only strategy. It was burden. It was knowing when to choose death to preserve life, and bearing the hatred that sometimes followed. But still, he whispered a prayer to their souls, and to the gods who had watched in silence. They did not speak of Scylla or Charybdis after that. Some could still hear the screams in their dreams. Others saw the teeth when they closed their eyes. The sea had tested them many times before, but this was different. It was no longer war, no longer mischief. It was sacrifice, brutal and senseless, but necessary. It changed them. The laughter died. The boasts fell silent. Now they rode not with pride, but with grim resolve. Survival had become its own form of heroism. And Odysseus, though wounded deeper than he let on, kept steering forward. The worst was not over. Far ahead, the island of the sun god Helios shimmered on the horizon. Tiresias had spoken of it. Circe had warned of it. The cattle that grazed there were sacred, golden, and immortal, watched over by divine eyes. To harm them was to invite death. And yet Odysseus knew his men. Hunger and desperation made promises hard to keep. He would have to stand firm. He would have to guard them not only from monsters, but from themselves. The sea calmed as the sun set. The ship rocked gently now, no longer fighting for every breath. But the air felt strange, like the pause before a storm. Odysseus watched the stars, each one a cold witness to what had passed. He had sailed through giants and enchantments, spoken with the dead, and now passed through a gate of terror. What lay ahead was not more dangerous, perhaps, but more human, and in that, more difficult. He closed his eyes and thought of Ithaca, of Penelope weaving and unweaving by candlelight, of Telemachus growing tall, waiting for a father he barely knew. He would reach them. He must. Even if the path led through sacrifice and shadow. The ship sailed on beneath the stars, and the Odyssey continued. Chapter 11. The Cattle of the Sun God. The sea glistened beneath a calm sky, a rare moment of stillness that felt more like warning than mercy. After surviving the terror of Scylla and the roar of Charybdis, Odysseus and his men found themselves adrift, bruised but alive. The ship creaked with wear, and the men's faces were hollow from hunger and grief. As they sailed, an island rose from the waves, rich and green, sun-warmed and quiet. The scent of grass and fresh water drifted to them on the wind. This was Thrinacia, the island of the sun god Helios, and Odysseus's heart sank, for he knew what danger it held. Tiresias had spoken of it. Circe too. "Harm not the cattle," they had warned. "They are sacred, immortal. If you slay even one, ruin will follow. Your men will die, and you will return home alone, if at all." Odysseus repeated these words to his men as they beached the ship and made camp. "Swear to me," he said. "Swear by all the gods that you will not touch the herds of Helios." The men raised their hands and swore. They promised, but their eyes burned with the look of men who feared starvation more than divine wrath. For a time, the island seemed a gift. Streams ran clear. Fruit grew on trees. They hunted wild birds and caught fish from the shore. But the winds would not change. Day after day, the sails hung limp. The ship could not move. The men waited, and their food dwindled. The fish became harder to find. The fruit grew scarce. Then the storms returned, sudden and fierce, driving them into a cave for shelter. Weeks passed. Their bellies hollowed, their promises grew faint, hunger gnawed at their oaths until they began to see the cattle not as sacred but as salvation. Odysseus, fearing what might come, went inland to pray. He climbed a high rock, poured wine to the gods, and begged them for mercy or a sign. But the gods gave him sleep. He lay on the rock, and slumber claimed him. In that brief absence, fate moved. The leader of the men, Eurylochus, spoke with fire in his voice. "What is death by starvation compared to death at sea?" he said. "Let us eat. We will build altars. We will make sacrifices. And if the gods strike us down, let it be after our bellies are full." The others listened. Their mouths watered. Their hands reached for knives. They slaughtered the cattle, great golden beasts who did not flee, as if knowing this was already decided. They carved the flesh, lit fires, and roasted the meat. The scent rose into the sky. Odysseus returned too late. The smoke betrayed them. He saw the bones, the fires, the fat crackling, and he knew. A great dread fell upon him, deeper than sorrow, deeper than anger. The men greeted him with weak smiles, offering apologies, but their fate had already begun to unravel. The next day, the storm ceased. The winds returned, soft and steady. The ship was repaired. The sea looked smooth again. It was a trap. The gods often wrap punishment in calm. They set sail, hopeful once more, their bellies full, their eyes brightened by the taste of meat. But the sun god Helios had seen everything. From the high halls of Olympus he demanded justice. "Strike them down," he said to Zeus. "They have slain what I love." Zeus, ruler of the sky, nodded once. "Their doom is sealed." At sea, the sky turned black. Thunder cracked. The winds howled. A bolt of lightning shattered the mast. The sails tore like paper. The sea rose in walls. One by one, the men were cast into the deep. The ship broke apart. Odysseus clung to a broken timber, the bodies of his men vanishing beneath the foam. He cried out to the gods, but no one answered. The wrath of Helios had come, swift and final. Not one man remained. Only Odysseus, soaked, wounded, drifting on a piece of his shattered hope. Days passed. The sea carried him alone, through hunger and madness, past strange waters and silent shores. He floated like a ghost, skin burned, lips cracked, thoughts broken by sorrow. At last he reached an island, small, quiet, hidden by trees and rocky cliffs. This was Ogygia, the land of the nymph Calypso. She would find him there, lying on the sand like driftwood. She would shelter him, heal him, and trap him with love. But that tale would come later. For now, Odysseus lay alone, the last of his crew, punished by the gods, and still not yet home. The journey had begun with warriors and glory. It now moved on through loss and exile. Odysseus had seen men fall to monsters and storms, to hunger and hubris, and though he lived, he did not feel victorious. He lived because the gods willed it, because fate had not yet finished its work. But he had paid the price. The cattle of the sun had been sacred, the warning had been clear, and still his men had chosen death. That choice had ended them. The Odyssey continued. Chapter 12. Shipwreck and the Island of Calypso. The sea had no color. It was not blue, nor gray, nor green. It was something darker, a silence that stretched beneath the sun. Odysseus floated alone, clinging to a splintered mast, the last remnant of his ship. Around him, nothing remained of his crew. The voices of his men, their laughter, their cries, their dreams of home, all gone, swallowed by the wrath of Helios and the judgment of Zeus. Days passed in blur and suffering. Hunger carved hollows in his face. The sun burned his skin. Salt encrusted his wounds. The waves mocked him gently, lifting and lowering him like a broken reed. Then, through the mist of pain and the blur of light, an island appeared, small and green, ringed with cliffs and forests. It was Ogygia, a place untouched by time, hidden from the eyes of gods and men. There, the nymph Calypso ruled in solitude, daughter of the Titan Atlas, as immortal and ancient as the sky. She saw the broken man wash ashore and rushed him with awe. He was not the first stranger to land upon her island, but he was the first she could not forget. She nursed him in her cave of stone and flowering vines, whispering songs of comfort while he drifted between sleep and sorrow. When Odysseus awoke, it was to softness. He lay on a bed of moss beneath a roof of woven leaves. The scent of myrtle and cedar filled the air. Calypso sat beside him, her eyes shining with strange warmth. "You are safe now," she said. "You will not suffer here." He blinked at her voice, not understanding. His mind still drifted with the waves, searching for companions who no longer lived. But she touched his brow and fed him, and over time, his strength returned. His memories sharpened, his grief deepened. Calypso offered him everything. She promised him immortality. "Stay," she whispered. "You need not suffer the sea again. You need not age. Be my husband, rule here with me. Forget your pain." And for a time, Odysseus did not speak. He watched the waves from her shore and wondered if it could be true. A life without death. A life without war. A life without loss. But always, behind his eyes, Ithaca called. Penelope. Telemachus. The land he had fought for, bled for. His heart could not forget. He was a man, not a god. He needed the mortal world, with all its sorrow and love. So the days passed, one into the next, blending like mist over water. Time did not move on Ogygia. It simply stretched. Odysseus worked in the grove, walked the shore, spoke little. At night, Calypso sang to him and wove tapestries of light. She gave him music and fruit and laughter, but Odysseus sat by the rocks, staring across the endless sea, and wept. Each evening he climbed to a high cliff and watched the sunset, and each morning he found no ship, no wind, no sign of change. His heart remained chained not by love, but by longing. At last the gods took notice. On Olympus, Athena pleaded with Zeus. "You have tormented him long enough. Let him go home." And Zeus, nodding slowly, sent Hermes to the island. The messenger god arrived in a blaze of golden light, winged sandals touching the sand like feathers. He found Calypso beneath her blooming roof, weaving with threads that shimmered like fireflies. "Zeus commands it," he said. "Release him." Calypso raged. "You gods envy what you do not control. I gave him love. I offered him peace. Must he suffer again?" But Hermes only bowed and vanished. That evening, Calypso came to Odysseus with tears in her eyes. "I will not hold you," she said. The gods have spoken. You may build a raft and leave this place. The sea will not be kind. But you are free. Odysseus, though his heart was torn, bowed low. You have been kind to me, he said, but I cannot stay. My home waits. My journey is not over. She gave him tools, cloth, rope. She gave him food and wine and a wind to start the voyage. But as he built his raft, she watched from the shadows, sorrow in her eyes, love that could not stop what must be. On the morning of his departure, Calypso stood beside him as he fastened the last knot. "You could have been a god," she whispered. Odysseus looked into her ageless eyes. "I am a man," he said, "and that is enough." He stepped onto the raft, the wind caught the sail, and he drifted from the shore. Calypso stood alone, her hair stirring in the breeze, until the horizon swallowed him. For 17 days he drifted, the sea alternately kind and cruel. The stars returned each night, cold and watchful. On the 18th day, Poseidon saw him. The sea god, still bitter, raised a storm that shattered the raft and hurled Odysseus into the deep. Waves tore at him, lightning flashed, and the sky howled with hatred. But Odysseus would not die. Clinging to the wreckage, he prayed to Ino, the sea spirit, who took pity and gave him a veil that would keep him from drowning. He wrapped it around his chest and swam, beaten and gasping, toward the faint shape of land. And thus he washed ashore once more, this time upon the land of the Phaeacians, a gentle people, blessed by the gods, who would hear his tale and offer him passage home. But that was still ahead. For now Odysseus lay half-buried in seaweed and sand, exhausted beyond speech, dreaming of a bed not of moss, but of linen, not of an immortal's embrace, but of his wife's quiet strength. The island of Calypso was behind him, its enchantments broken, its peace refused. What waited ahead was still unknown. Chapter 13. The Counsel of the Phaeacians. Odysseus lay in the sand like driftwood, salt-crusted and weary, the waves lapping softly against his feet. He had washed ashore half dead, but alive, delivered from Calypso's enchanted isle, through Poseidon's wrath, and now onto the shores of a kingdom unknown. Around him rose tall reeds and flowering bushes, and above him the sun blinked through drifting clouds. He stirred, groaned, and dragged himself beneath an olive tree. There, hidden by its branches, he fell into a deep sleep, the first without fear in many days. When he woke, laughter filled the air. Girls were playing on the beach, their voices light as gulls on the wind. One stepped away from the others and came close. Her name was Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians. She had come to wash linen by the stream, but found instead a man, wild-haired and weary, yet noble in bearing. Odysseus rose and spoke gently, shielding his eyes. "Princess," he said, "I am a stranger in need, not by choice but by fate. Have mercy." Nausicaa, wise beyond her years, saw the truth in him. She brought him clothes, food, and led him toward her father's halls. Odysseus followed, walking through gardens rich with vines and trees heavy with fruit. The palace of the Phaeacians gleamed like polished marble, its walls adorned with bronze and gold. Servants moved silently, and fountains sang in the courtyards. It was a land blessed by the gods, untouched by war or grief. Nausicaa instructed him to wait outside the gates and then enter on his own, falling at the feet of Queen Arete, her mother. "She is wise and kind," she said. "If she favors you, the rest will follow." Odysseus entered, cloaked in mist by Athena's hand so that no one noticed his travel-worn state. When he dropped to his knees before the queen, the spell lifted, and all gasped at the sudden appearance of a stranger. King Alcinous, startled but curious, rose to meet him. Odysseus bowed low. "I am a man from far away, blown off course by the wrath of the sea. I seek only shelter, and, if the gods allow, passage home." Arete, moved by his humility, welcomed him. Alcinous, seeing the favor in his queen's eyes, offered a seat at the table and a feast in his honor. For many days Odysseus stayed among the Phaeacians. He did not reveal his name at first, nor his lineage. He ate, rested, and listened to the music of lyres, the tales of distant heroes, and the songs of war and peace. But when Alcinous declared a festival in his honor, with games and storytelling, Odysseus could no longer stay hidden behind silence. He watched the Phaeacian youths throw discus and race, their limbs swift and strong, their spirits untouched by hardship. One youth mocked him, seeing only a stranger's weariness. Odysseus, stung by pride, rose and hurled a discus farther than any had that day. A hush fell. Alcinous, now impressed beyond doubt, turned to him that evening and said, "Tell us your name, stranger. Tell us your story, so that we may know the man who has shown such strength." And at last, Odysseus spoke. His voice was quiet at first, but each word held the weight of pain and memory. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." Gasps rang out. The name had traveled far, carried by songs of Troy. And now, here he was, not as a conqueror, but as a castaway. He told them all, from the fall of Troy to the Cyclops cave, from Circe's island to the Underworld, from the Sirens to Scylla and Charybdis, from the slaughter of Helios's cattle to Calypso's love. The room grew silent as he spoke, the firelight flickering across faces filled with awe and sorrow. When he finished, Alcinous rose. "You shall not suffer more. Tomorrow, we will send you home, with treasures to honor your trials. The sea will be your path, not your prison." True to his word, Alcinous called forth his sailors. The next day, they prepared a grand ship, swift and sturdy. Odysseus was bathed and clothed in fine robes. Gifts were placed aboard gold, bronze, linen, and wine. That evening, a final feast was held, and the bard sang once more, not of Achilles or Hector, but of Odysseus, the man who had endured. Tears filled Odysseus's eyes, for the song reminded him of what he had lost, and what he still hoped to gain. At dawn, he boarded the ship. Alcinous clasped his hand. "May you find your home, and may the gods give you peace at last." The sailors rowed without sound. Odysseus lay on soft blankets in the hold, his body at ease, his heart racing. For the first time in years, he did not watch the horizon. He closed his eyes and slept. The oars dipped and rose, dipped and rose. The sea, for once, was kind, and as he slept, the ship drew near the shores of Ithaca. The Odyssey neared its end. Chapter 14. Odysseus returns to Ithaca. The sea was calm, the sky dim with early dawn, as the Phaeacian ship glided across the final stretch of water. Odysseus lay beneath a woven canopy, wrapped in soft robes, still asleep. The journey had been silent, smooth as a dream. And now, at last, Ithaca's rocky cliffs rose from the sea, cloaked in mist, unchanged by time or war. The sailors, true to their word, rowed into a quiet cove, where the beach met a grove of olive trees. Gently, they lifted the sleeping hero and laid him on the sand, placing his treasures beside him. Without word or ceremony, they turned back to their ship and vanished over the horizon. Odysseus awoke with a start. The air was different, sharper, familiar. He sat up, blinking at the landscape. Trees he knew, stones shaped by time and memory. He was home. After years of wandering, of loss, of gods and monsters, he had returned to the soil of Ithaca. And yet his heart was still. There was no joy yet, no triumph, only caution. He knew his house would not be as he had left it. He knew enemies might wait in his halls. The journey was not yet done, and so he hid his treasures beneath a tree and wandered into the grove. There, Athena appeared. The gray-eyed goddess stood in the form of a shepherd boy, staff in hand, eyes sparkling. "Odysseus," she said, "you are as cunning as the sea is wide. Do you not recognize your land?" He smiled faintly. "I do, but I am not ready to be recognized by it." She cast off her disguise and took her true form. "Wise as ever," she said. "Then let me help you." With a touch, she changed his appearance. His skin grew weathered, his clothes tattered, his eyes clouded with age. A beggar stood where a king had lain. "Now," she said, "you may walk safely among them." She told him of what had become of his home. Suitors, young, arrogant nobles, had filled his palace, each hoping to claim Penelope and Ithaca in his absence. They ate his food, drank his wine, mocked his name, and yet Penelope had not given in. Each night, she unraveled the shroud she wove by day, stalling for time. Telemachus, his son, now a man, searched the seas for news of his father. "But danger stirs," Athena warned. The suitors planned to kill him upon his return. At her command, Odysseus made his way to the hut of Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, who knew him not, but welcomed the disguised stranger with kindness. Eumaeus fed him, gave him shelter, and spoke warmly of his absent master. "Odysseus was a just man," he said. "If he lives, the gods are not blind." Odysseus, moved beyond words, listened in silence. That night, another guest arrived. Telemachus returned from his travels, weary but alive. Eumaeus rushed to greet him, eyes brimming with tears. Odysseus watched his son from the shadows, seeing the strength in his stride, the weight of longing in his voice. Chapter 16. Reunion with Telemachus. The sun had barely crested the hills when Odysseus stepped through the orchard path that led to the swineherd's hut, hidden in the foothills of Ithaca. A faint mist hung in the trees, and birds stirred the stillness with morning song. Inside the hut, Telemachus sat beside the hearth, his young face shadowed by worry. He had returned from his long search abroad only days ago, and though he had found no word of his father in the world of men, something in his heart had changed. He no longer mourned the dead. He prepared to stand among the living. When the door opened and the beggar entered, Telemachus rose in courtesy, never suspecting the truth beneath the cloak and beard. He offered a stool, poured wine, and asked gentle questions of the road. Odysseus, watching his son, fought to keep the storm within him still. How tall he had grown, how steady his gaze. The boy he had left was now a man, and though he burned to embrace him, he knew the moment must be chosen with care. Athena, unseen but near, saw this, and she willed it time. She touched Odysseus with her power, and in an instant the rags vanished. His skin smoothed, his stature straightened, his eyes blazed like storm-lit seas. Telemachus staggered back, clutching the air as though waking from a dream. "Stranger," he whispered, "you are no longer what you were." Odysseus stepped forward, tears shining in his eyes. "Telemachus," he said, "it is I am your father, returned at last." The silence that followed was deep. Then the boy moved, arms outstretched, and they fell into each other's grasp. There are many kinds of reunion in this world. Some are full of laughter, others of tears. This one was full of silence at first, of disbelief dissolving into truth. Telemachus held his father, the weight of years crumbling around them. Odysseus, who had spoken with ghosts, faced monsters, defied gods, now trembled in the arms of his son. The years stolen from them could not be returned, but they were together now, and that was a victory greater than conquest. They sat by the fire and spoke long into the morning. Odysseus told of his voyage, of Troy, of the Cyclops, of Circe, the Underworld, and Calypso's lonely love. Telemachus listened, wide-eyed, each tale a key unlocking the mystery of the man before him. Then Odysseus turned serious. "We must act swiftly," he said. "The suitors grow bold. They feast in my hall, plot your death, and claim your mother. But they have not yet faced Ithaca's true king." Telemachus nodded. "I am ready." Together, they laid out their plan. Odysseus would return to the palace in disguise. He would study his enemies. Telemachus would remove the weapons from the hall, as if to safeguard them from quarrels. Their allies, Eumaeus the swineherd and Phaeacians the cowherd, would be brought in once trust was sure. When the moment came, they would strike. It would not be easy. The suitors were many, armed and arrogant. But justice does not fear numbers. It waits for its hour. As the day wore on, they practiced with quiet discipline. Telemachus learned the timing of his father's signals, the strength in his grip, the fury still alive in his gaze. Odysseus, though grayed by hardship, moved with the ease of a hunter. The years had taught him not only patience, but clarity. His purpose was no longer glory, it was restoration. The house of Ithaca had been dark for too long. It was time to bring the light back. That evening, Odysseus returned to his disguise. The beard returned, the cloak frayed, the skin weathered once more. Telemachus helped him bind the rags, his hand steady, his heart burning. "No one must know until the moment is right," Odysseus said. "Not even your mother." Telemachus nodded, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "I will follow you." And so father and son, joined by blood and bound by fate, walked side by side down the path toward the city. To the world, they were a beggar and a prince, but the gods knew better. They watched from the clouds above, and they whispered among themselves that the storm was nearly upon Ithaca, not of wind, not of sea, but of reckoning. The Odyssey was no longer a journey across distant lands. It had come home. Chapter 15. The Disguise of a Beggar. The sun rose slowly over Ithaca, casting pale gold across the rugged hills and olive groves. In the low morning light, a bent figure shuffled along the path toward the city. His cloak was torn, his beard unkempt, his skin sun-dark and weary. None who passed him gave him a second glance. He was only a beggar, another shadow among many. But beneath the grime and rags walked Odysseus, king of Ithaca, master of guile and endurance, returned at last to the heart of his kingdom. Athena had worked her spell well. Even close friends and old retainers would not know him. It was not just his face that had changed, but his voice, his posture, the very way he moved. Yet his eyes remained sharp, watching, calculating. He entered the gates of his city without fanfare. 20 years had passed since he had last walked those streets. The houses looked smaller now, the people older, and in the air hung something bitter, decay, disrespect, the weight of unearned power. He made his way to his own palace, where once lords and warriors had gathered to feast in his name. Now the door stood open to men who laughed too loudly, ate too greedily, drank too deep. The suitors, over 100 of them, lounged on his chairs, insulted his name, plotted over his wine. They competed for Penelope's hand as if she were a prize to be seized, not a queen to be won. And she, ever wise, ever faithful, endured them with dignity, buying time with riddles and tricks, waiting for a man the world believed dead. At the threshold, Odysseus paused. A dog lay nearby, old, thin, its coat gray with age. Argos, his dog, the pup he had trained as a young man. Argos lifted his head, ears twitching. Though blind and frail, he smelled the truth. His tail thumped weakly. Odysseus blinked away tears. He could not speak. The dog lowered his head and died, having waited 20 years to see his master again. Odysseus stepped inside, heart heavy and burning. He was greeted with scorn. The suitors mocked him, tossed him scraps, sneered at his rags. One of them, Antinous, cruelest of all, struck him with a stool. Odysseus did not flinch. His patience was iron. He endured the insult. He sat by the hearth and watched. Each man revealed his nature in the way he ate, the way he spoke to servants, the way he treated a stranger. Odysseus remembered their faces. Justice would come, but not yet. Among the faithful few was Eumaeus, the swineherd who had first given him shelter, and Phaeacians, the cowherd, quiet and loyal. Odysseus spoke carefully with them in private, learning who still served with honor. Both men spoke of their longing for the true king's return, their disgust with the suitors, their loyalty to Penelope and her son. In time, he revealed himself to them. Tears flowed. Oaths were sworn. 4 men now stood in secret alliance: Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Phaeacians, ready to retake what had been stolen. Meanwhile, Penelope moved through the halls with grace and grief. Her eyes had grown tired, her heart torn between hope and resignation. Yet when she saw the beggar, something stirred. She questioned him kindly, asking of his travels, and he, weaving words like silk, spoke of Odysseus, not as himself, but as another who had seen the hero on his journey. Penelope listened, silent and still. "He will return," the beggar said, "soon." She did not know why she believed him, but a part of her, long buried under sorrow, flickered into life. That night she ordered a test. "Tomorrow," she said aloud, "I will offer my hand to the man who can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads." The suitors laughed, confident that they would win. But Odysseus in his rags smiled to himself. The time had come. And thus, beneath disguise and danger, the king of Ithaca moved among his enemies. The halls of his home were no longer a palace, They were a battlefield in waiting. He had returned not to celebration, but to silence and shadows. Yet every step brought him closer to the reckoning. Every insult carved the path to justice. The Odyssey was nearly complete. Chapter 17. The Contest of the Bow. The hall of Odysseus stood tall against the morning sky, but its heart had long been hollowed by greed. Inside, the suitors laughed and drank, their robes stained with wine, their voices echoing off the walls like crows cawing above a battlefield. They sat upon Odysseus's benches, feasted at his tables, and carved his kingdom into their games. None among them knew that the king had returned. None saw the storm building in the shape of a beggar, quiet among the shadows. Penelope entered the hall with eyes like polished stone. Dignity cloaked her in silence. 20 years had passed since her husband's ship had vanished beyond the horizon, but she had not forgotten him. Nor had she surrendered. Now she stood with a bow in her hand, a great curved weapon made of polished horn and wood strung so tight that few in Ithaca could bend it. "Today," she said, "I will choose a husband. He who can string this bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads shall be my lord." The suitors roared their approval. Each believed himself strong enough to master the weapon. The axes were placed in a line, their hollow rings aligned. The bow passed from hand to hand. One by one, they tried. One by one, they failed. The string refused to bend. Their arms shook. Sweat ran down proud faces. Some laughed nervously. Others cursed. None succeeded. The bow was more than a weapon. It was a test, one only Odysseus could pass. From his seat at the hearth, the beggar spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried. "May I try?" The room fell silent, then erupted in mocking laughter. Antinous stood, red with scorn. "You? An old tramp?" But Penelope, who had spoken with the beggar before, raised a hand. "Let him try," she said. "Let fate speak." Then, without a word, she turned and left the hall, unable to watch what her heart feared and hoped in equal measure. The bow passed into Odysseus's hands. He ran his fingers along it, caressing the wood as if greeting an old friend. He examined the string. Then, in one smooth motion, he strung the bow. No tremble, no struggle. A silence fell so deep it seemed even the hearth fire held its breath. He plucked the string. It sang like a lyre. Then he took an arrow from the quiver, notched it, and aimed. The shaft flew like lightning. It passed clean through all 12 axe heads, thudding into the timber beyond. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Odysseus stood. The disguise fell from his shoulders. Athena's magic lifted. His face shone in the firelight, lean and fierce, his eyes sharp as blades. "I am Odysseus," he said, "King of Ithaca. You who have dishonored my house, eaten my food, threatened my wife and son, you will pay." Panic exploded. Some reached for weapons, but Telemachus had already locked them away. The suitors were trapped. Odysseus turned to Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Phaeacians, each now armed and ready. "Strike," he said. "Let justice speak." And justice thundered through the hall. Chapter 18. The Slaughter of the Suitors. The hall that once echoed with the laughter of uninvited men now held only the whirring silence before a storm. Odysseus stood tall, bow in hand, face revealed, eyes lit with fury and purpose. Around him, the suitors trembled. Some stammered, some cursed, some bolted toward the walls, hoping to vanish into stone. But there was no escape. Telemachus had closed and barred the great doors. Eumaeus and Phaeacians had hidden the weapons. The wolves had trapped the herd. And now came the reckoning. Antinous, leader of the Suitors, rose from his seat with a sneer, goblet still in hand. He reached for a word, for a threat, for a lie that might buy him time. But Odysseus raised his bow and loosed the string. The arrow struck Antinous in the throat. His cup dropped, spilling wine like blood before his body followed. Gasps rose like smoke. Chairs scraped. Men screamed. Odysseus's voice rang out. "You fed on my wealth, courted my wife, threatened my son. You showed no fear of gods or man. Now you shall answer for it." The next arrow flew, then another. Telemachus leapt beside his father, sword in hand, his first battle fought not on foreign shores, but in his own home. Eumaeus and Phaeacians took up arms, striking down suitors as they scrambled for shelter behind pillars and overturned tables. But there was no safety in the Hall of Justice. The gods watched. The bloodline defended itself. The suitors fought back, grabbing what weapons they could. Swords from walls, spears from hidden corners, but they were untrained in war. They were lords, not soldiers. Their blades were dull with disuse, their courage soft with ease. Odysseus moved like the sea he had crossed, relentless, unpredictable. Arrows found hearts. Blades met flesh. And as each man fell, the room became less a courtship hall and more a tomb. One suitor Eurymachus dropped to his knees. "It was not me," he cried. "It was Antinous. He led us. Spare us, and we will repay all we have taken." Odysseus stepped forward. "You all drank my wine. You all planned my son's death. There is no repayment that buys off shame." He struck Eurymachus down with a blade through the chest. The suitors tried to regroup. A few rushed the doors. Others tried to form a line. But Odysseus and his allies were a wall of fire. Telemachus fought fiercely beside his father, proving with each blow that blood runs true. Eumaeus fought with the rage of the forgotten. Phaeacians wept as he fought, mourning the ruin of the home he had served so long. When the last suitor fell, silence returned. The hall stank of blood and smoke. Bodies lay strewn among the wreckage of stolen feasts and shattered goblets. Odysseus stood in the center, bow lowered, chest heaving. For a long time, none of them spoke. Then Odysseus turned to his son. "It is done," he said. "The house is ours again." But justice was not finished. Servants and maids had watched it all. Some had stayed loyal. Others had whispered secrets to the suitors, had laughed at their cruelty, had betrayed Penelope's dignity. Odysseus judged them with the same calm he had shown the suitors. The faithful were spared. The traitors were punished. The blood of Ithaca was cleansed, not only by blade, but by truth. Athena, watching from Olympus, smiled. Her favorite had not failed her. Justice had been patient. Now it had been swift. And yet she knew the hardest moment still lay ahead, for Odysseus had slain the enemies. But what would Penelope say when her stranger beggar was revealed to be a king soaked in blood? Could love survive such distance and such fury? The answer waited beyond the chamber of the dead, in the quiet room where Penelope still sat, waiting. Chapter 19. The Recognition of Penelope. The hall stood silent, the storm spent. Broken tables lay in piles. Arrows jutted from columns. Bodies slumped in unnatural repose across the stones. Odysseus stood still, blood on his hands, the bow quiet at last. His breath came slow, his shoulders heavy, not from battle, but from memory. Around him stood Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Phaeacians, their hearts pounding with the weight of what had been reclaimed. Yet the work was not finished. Justice had returned to the house of Odysseus, but the soul of it remained waiting in another room behind another door. Penelope sat in the upper chamber, surrounded by shadows and silence. The distant sound of battle had faded. She had heard the clash, the cries, the sudden hush. Her maids, trembling, whispered that the suitors were dead, that a beggar had transformed into a warrior, that Odysseus himself had returned. But Penelope, long seasoned by sorrow, did not rise. Her heart dared not leap. Too many years had passed. Too many false hopes had withered. "I will see with my own eyes," she said, "and even then, I will not trust them too quickly." Odysseus bathed, dressed in clean robes, and entered the chamber. He came not as a beggar now, nor as a king in armor, but as a man shaped by time and pain. Penelope looked at him, truly looked, and felt a tremor in her chest. His face was familiar, his stance, the curve of his shoulders. That age and hardship had changed him. Could this truly be her husband? Or was it a god in disguise, sent to torment her once more? She said little. He said less. They stared at one another like strangers at the edge of a dream. Telemachus, overcome by the cold distance, cried out, "Mother, this is no trick! This is my father, your husband, the man you have waited for!" But Penelope shook her head. "If it is truly he," she said, "then he will know our secret. The one thing only he and I share." Odysseus watched her closely. He saw the caution in her eyes, the longing buried beneath it. He nodded once. "Prepare the bed," she told her maids. "Move it into the hallway." But Odysseus stepped forward, his voice firm. "That cannot be done," he said. "The bed cannot be moved. I built it myself, around the trunk of an olive tree. I carved it with my own hands. Its roots run into the ground. If it has been moved, then no one sleeps in it now." Penelope gasped. Tears welled in her eyes, and she covered her face. Only Odysseus could have known the truth. That secret, buried in wood and love, could not be guessed or mimicked. It was theirs alone. The years, the grief, the silence, they shattered in an instant. She ran to him, and they embraced, weeping not with sorrow, but with release. Husband and wife, separated by war and fate, held each other as though trying to make up for every missed moment, every night spent wondering if the other still breathed. No more disguises, no more tests. This was no dream. This was home. They talked through the night, their words tumbling like water from a spring. She told him of the suitors' cruelty, of Telemachus growing without a father, of the weaving and unweaving of the shroud. He told her of the Trojan War, of the trials, the monsters, the gods, of Circe and Calypso and the ghosts of the dead, of the friends he lost, the strangers who helped him, and the strength it took to reach her again. Their stories filled the dark until the stars faded and morning returned, and as the sun rose over Ithaca, it lit not just a kingdom restored, but a marriage renewed. Penelope and Odysseus stood side by side once more, two souls forged in sorrow and sealed in faith. No greater reunion had ever graced the halls of man. But beyond the palace, news would spread. Families would mourn the suitors. Anger would stir. And peace, though desired, would still need to be won. The Odyssey was almost over. Chapter 20. Peace restored in Ithaca. Morning broke over Ithaca like a blessing. The sky blushed with gold, and the olive trees shimmered in soft light. Birds sang from the hills, and sheep stirred in the pastures. Yet beneath this peaceful veil the air trembled with tension. Word of the suitors' deaths had begun to spread. Mothers wailed. Brothers gripped their swords. Fathers cursed the name of Odysseus. Vengeance stirred among those who had lost kin to the justice dealt in the palace hall. The people of Ithaca had long watched their king's absence. Now they saw his return marked by blood. Odysseus stood in the courtyard, calm as stone. Around him, loyal men gathered. Telemachus stood at his side, taller with every breath. Eumaeus and Phaeacians flanked them, eyes watchful. But they were few. The sons of the slain were many. A reckoning loomed, not from gods, but from men. Athena, watching from Olympus, frowned. Her champion had triumphed, yes, but peace hung by a thread. If it snapped, Ithaca would drown in civil war. Zeus spoke then, voice thundering across the heavens. "Let this be ended." And Athena descended once more, veiled in mortal form. She appeared to Odysseus and whispered a path forward. "Go," she said, "to the old orchard, where your father Laertes dwells. You must show him who you are. Let the roots of your house bind the kingdom anew." Odysseus obeyed. In the fields beyond the city, Laertes worked in silence, bent with age, hands black with earth. The years had carved sorrow into his back. When Odysseus approached, the old man did not raise his head. He saw only another traveler. "What news of Ithaca?" he asked. Voice rough, Odysseus paused, then answered with a tale of a man lost and found. "I met your son," he said. "He lives. He has returned." Laertes looked up, eyes sharp with sudden light. "Tell me the proof," he said. "Tell me something only he would know." And Odysseus, smiling, did just that. He spoke of the fruit trees his father had planted for him when he was a child. He named each one, the fig, the pear, the olive. Laertes trembled. His son had returned. Father and son embraced, and the fields seemed to sigh with relief. But peace had not yet come. The families of the suitors gathered in the square, blades drawn, voices loud with rage. "Shall there be no law?" they cried. "He has murdered our sons in cold blood." Even the gods watched with caution. Ithaca stood on the brink. Odysseus returned with Telemachus and his small band. The crowd parted. There, before all, he spoke, not with threats, but with truth. "I was your king. You knew me once. You feasted in my halls, stood with me in war. Then I vanished. You believed me dead. But I lived. And I returned to find strangers in my home, dishonoring my wife, plotting against my son. I did not spill innocent blood. I punished those who trespassed on my throne." Some in the crowd stirred uneasily. Others raised their voices still. A spear might have flown. But Athena appeared then, not in disguise, but in her full glory. Her armor gleamed like starlight. Her voice rang like iron. "Enough," she said. "You have seen war. You have seen justice. Now see peace." At her command, the weapons dropped. The anger melted. Memory returned of a kingdom ruled in wisdom, of a time when gods and men walked together in harmony. The people knelt. "We will follow Odysseus," they said. "Let Ithaca know peace." And so it was. Odysseus walked through his land, no longer hunted, no longer hidden. He ruled with patience, his mind tempered by trials few could fathom. Penelope walked beside him, queen once more, her gaze calm and strong. Telemachus grew into his inheritance, beloved by the people, guided by his father's strength and his mother's wisdom. The palace was restored. The fields bore fruit. Songs were sung again in the halls. But sometimes, late at night, Odysseus would sit alone beneath the stars. He would listen to the wind and remember, not with bitterness, not with pain, but with awe. For few men had seen what he had seen. Fewer still had returned. His name was legend now, but in his heart, he remained what he had always been. A man who longed for home and never stopped walking toward it. The Odyssey was over. Peace had returned to Ithaca.